activist is lamenting over the poor rate of reported cases of uniformed personnel, thus urging the federal government to take decisive action so as to stop incessant killings in the country. The executive director, Global Rights Nigeria, Baiyewu Abiodun, gave the expression while presenting the 2019 report tagged Mass Atrocities, Casualties, Tracking on Wednesday in Abuja. She said, in 2019 alone, the report has uncovered at least 481 security personnel and 2,707 civilians that are not recorded due to the general tendency to underreporting military casualties in the theaters of operation. Baiyewu, while citing Section 14 subsection 2b of the Nigerian Constitution, noted that the primary purpose of the government is to ensure the security and welfare of the people, thus demanding for urgent intervention in order to curb violence which plays a negative role in the lives of the populace. Insecurity in Nigeria has continued to widen due to various casualties and atrocities occasioned by insurgents and armed banditries, especially in the northwest and northeastern parts of the country. Victims of these circumstances are not limited to civilians alone, but with armed personnel who are often overpowered and weapons being taken away due to a lack of sophisticated weapons. Still speaking, Global Rights Executive Director Baiyewu Abiodun expressed with optimism the need for the country to overhaul its security architecture so as to mitigate violence that have embedded the nation. She noted that despite the slight difference of about 240 killings in 2019 as compared to 2018, which recorded 3,428 deaths as against 3,188, the propensity that 1 in every 6 casualties are security agents, as the service weapons of the killed officers are often taken away by their assailants.
The loss of more than 3,000 persons to mass atrocities, not including armed robbery and other forms of isolated violence in any country in a single year, is an indication that all is not well and in need of a declaration of the same. The nature and geographical spread of the violence is also quite instructive. The highlights of the report include: 1. That the most prevalent forms of atrocities included cult gang clashes, extrajudicial killings, resource crisis, kidnappings, and Boko Haram ISWAP attacks. The states with the highest number of fatalities, the loss of more than 3,000 persons to mass atrocities, not including armed robbery and other forms of isolated violence in any country in a single year, is an indication that all is not well and in need of a declaration of the same. The nature and geographical spread of the violence is also quite instructive. The highlights of the report include: 1. That the most prevalent forms of atrocities included cult gang clashes, extrajudicial killings, resource crisis, kidnappings, and Boko Haram ISWAP attacks. The states with the highest number of fatalities remained Borno State in the northeast, closely followed by Zamfara State in the northwest. Based on available data, the 10 most vulnerable states in Nigeria by the list number of deaths recorded in each were Borno with 728 deaths, Zamfara with at least 450, Kaduna with at least 280, Katsina with at least 254, Taraba with at least 181, Rivers with at least 176, Benue with at least 167, Niger with at least 100, Sokoto with at least 90, and Kogi State with at least 88. The least affected state in the entire federation was Abia State with 1 killing. Another very hard fact that this report reveals that 1 in 5.5 persons who were killed in the course of the year were state security personnel, and this is highly alarming. Our enumerators recorded at least 481 of them, most of them soldiers in active service. This points to the fact that our security personnel have become an endangered species. As the report rightly points out, for every security personnel downed in the course of active service, their arms fall in the in the hands of wrong elements who will use them to foment further insecurity. Of particular tragedy was the extrajudicial killing of officers of the Nigerian Army of 3. Violence-related deaths were also recorded in every state, with Abia notably the least impacted with 1 death. Borno, like I said, at least 728. The North and the Middle Belt region recorded the highest number of casualties, while Rivers State recorded the highest number in the South, with at least 176 deaths, largely due to cult gang clashes. Every month of the year recorded casualties above 100, from the types of violence mentioned earlier. June had the highest number of deaths last year, with 504, while November was the lightest, with 112 deaths. For the month of June, we noted the correlation between the federal government's announcement of the Ruga settlement programs and the sudden upsurge of violence in Benue State that had hitherto assumed relative quiet, especially with the deployment of Operation Whirlstroke in the Benue Valley. However, on a positive note for Benue State, we note that the Giaku killings and the clash which occurred between herders and farmers in Agatu were the only incidents of mass violence on record for the period, which suggests that the federal military operations in Benue was relatively effective in suppressing killings. Kidnappings in 2019 also became of a more commercial nature. Victims were targeted or randomly kidnapped in both urban and rural settings and on highways. The infamous Kaduna-Abuja highway constituted a hotspot for abductions in spite of several security checkpoints along the length of the road. The Northwest also suffered from this phenomenon for more than a year, particularly in Katsina and Zamfara State. There were also elements of political kidnappings earlier in the year around election seasons across the country. In November, there were at least 112 deaths, some of which were related to electoral violence occasioned in the run-up to and during and after the Kogi and Bayelsa elections. You will also recall that there were a number of election-related deaths from November 2018 up to April 2019, covering the course of the election. How did we come about these numbers, and what methods did we use? We have baselines from which to draw inferences from in terms of human assets and the violence markers. It's difficult to ascribe certainty to numbers and intensities. So for this report, we have only included killings verified by at least 2 or more sources. We are aware of the general tendencies to underreport military casualties in the theater of operation, particularly in the northeast of the country. We recognize that actual figures of the uniform casualties are likely to be significantly higher. The numbers for 2019 were slightly lower compared to the numbers for 2018, in which period we had recorded 3,428 deaths, which means in 2019 we recorded 240 deaths less. Disaggregated, in 2019 there were at least 481 security personnel that were killed, and at least 2,707 civilians. It's instructive, again, we emphasize that nearly 1 in every 6 persons killed in mass atrocities in Nigeria was a state security personnel, and this is an alarming trend. Equally alarming is the implication that their service weapons were taken away by their assailants. There's a rise in kidnappings across Nigeria, which suggests that ransoms have become a major source of funding for both the insurgency in the northeast of the country and for banditry in the northwest. Additionally, the patterns of attack on security personnel and its formation is consistent with the conclusion that the attackers rearm themselves with weapons stolen from overrunning security posts or killing security personnel. Our methodology errs on the side of the conservative, pointing only to verifiable incidents and locations. The figures therefore provided represents the list of possible numbers of casualties. Actual casualty figures are likely to be much higher, but we're confident that the trends evident from these figures will hold up to scrutiny. From the foregoing figures, it's apparent Nigeria's threshold for violence is high, and its hardcore impact on security and well-being of both citizens and security populations can only be imagined. It brings to mind Section 14(2)(b) of the Constitution, which provides that the security and welfare of the people shall be the primary purpose of government. The challenge in mitigating violence in Nigeria and the protection of its people clearly falls on government and its agencies. It therefore follows that the country's security architecture is in need of an urgent overhaul. And by security architecture, we refer not just to security agencies and hardware, but the entire governance structure and institutions charged with dealing with the triggers that perpetuate these forms of violence, which are multidimensional. While there are myriads of triggers to talk about, we will only mention a few. First, arms and light weapons. The proliferation of arms and light weapons across Nigeria is worrisome and directly related to that. Elections are getting more violent. Politics in Nigeria is still a game of win at all costs or lose at your peril. No retreat, no surrender. Incentivizing violence. This is evident in the 2019 general elections, in which security agents freely took sides in the violence. In the Kogi and Bayelsa elections at the end of the run-up elections at the end of the year, small arms and light weapons were freely deployed. Revisiting incentives for public office and citizens' participation in governance is therefore imperative. Communities' distrust for government's willingness, and more recently, power to protect them from aggression has also contributed to Nigeria's underground arms market. Finally, its porous borders facilitate their easy import. The number of out-of-school children in Nigeria. Nigeria has the highest number of out-of-school children in the entire planet, a pointer for unskilled human resources and a future for low productivity and unemployment. These are drivers for poverty and crime. Impunity. While corruption is rife in Nigeria, its greatest problem is impunity. There's been very little accountability for the various crimes perpetrated against individuals and communities in the past. The misapplied quest for justice often results in self-help reprisal attacks, which morph and snowball into bigger crimes and conflicts. Poverty. Endemic poverty drives violence. The World Bank statistics recently released shows that 87% of the most chronically poor people in Nigeria live in northern Nigeria, and it is no surprise that the highest number of the killings, therefore, were also in northern Nigeria. When people have nothing to lose, they help everyone else lose everything. The failure to provide social welfare and palliatives for suffering communities continue to be drivers for crimes and conflicts across Nigeria. Resource governance. Nigeria's poor governance of its natural and material resources trigger violence. And by natural resources, we mean not just minerals, but also land and potable water bodies. Poorly maintained capital infrastructure, lack of fiscal justice, and lack of judicious disbursement of state and national assets have also led to citizens' frustration. Finally, can Nigeria surmount its challenges and become a safe haven for development? We believe so. But we also know that it will take a great deal of political will, trust building across ethnic, religious, class, and other interest groups, active trust building. It will also take addressing actively, and not just by word of mouth, historical violence and injustices throughout Nigeria and making clear attempts at remedying them.
Also, Global Rights Co-convener Professor Chidi Odinkalu In his remarks, noted that the major causes of insecurity in Nigeria is the problem of landmarks, stressing that the correlation between violence and size of landmarks is relatively high due to the ungoverned spaces, thus urging the government to look inwardly to tackling the challenges in order to mitigate casualties in the country.
Military measures on fighting and defeating Boko Haram and all of that. But, you know, the good thing about numbers is that they make us honest. If you care about numbers and you look at them well, they give you things that you wouldn't otherwise see. We think we have a security problem. A security problem is a symptom of an underlying problem. It's a governance problem. That's what these numbers say. I don't know how you, so let me try and explain to you how I get at that. 3 states make up nearly 50% of the killings. Actually, 45.8% of the killings. That's Borno, Zamfara, and Kaduna. Yes? Now, at the moment, the top states include Borno, Zamfara, Kaduna, Niger, Taraba, Adamawa, Katsina. Now, I don't know what, now let me, number 1 state security problem in Nigeria is Borno State. 70,800 and a bit square kilometers. Yes? That is the second largest state in Nigeria. The largest state in Nigeria is Niger State. 76,353 square kilometers. Yes? The third, in terms of land mass in Nigeria, is Taraba State, about 57,000 square kilometers. The fourth is Kaduna State, 46,000 square kilometers. The fifth is Bauchi State. Sixth is Yobe. Seventh is Zamfara. Are you seeing a trend here? There is a total correlation between violence in Nigeria and size of land mass. The correlation is complete. In the top 10, the only state not in the top 10 of territory of land mass in Nigeria is Rivers State. But Rivers State gives you, actually confirms what I'm just saying. Because Rivers State has a lot of ungovernable water mass. It has ungovernable creeks. The land mass problem in northern Nigeria is a problem of ungoverned spaces. Niger State is about 9% of Nigeria's land mass. It is also 25 local government areas. Now, that is 76,300 square kilometers. Imo State, with barely 5,000 square kilometers. 5,000. Yes? That is, Niger State is over 15 times the size of Imo State and has 25 local government areas. Imo State, which is 15 times less the size of Niger State, has 27 local government areas. Borno State, which is exactly 70,000, nearly 71,000 square kilometers, has 27 local government areas, the same size as Imo State. Lagos State is the smallest state in Nigeria with about 3,700 square kilometers. You will not have banditry in Lagos State. You may have cults, but you will not have banditry. Why is this important? Because if we don't address the question of ungoverned spaces, we will continue to have this issue. What this also means is, secondly, that 1 naira stolen from the public purse in northern Nigeria, in those states with big landmass, is worth much more than 1 naira stolen from the states with small landmass. Because with every little money you steal, you damage the capacity of government to go beyond the governed spaces. That is the story. The big story here is Nigeria's insecurity problem is a governance problem. Nigeria's insecurity problem is a problem of extending the frontiers of government to those places not yet reached. And that is why we cannot shoot ourselves out of this crisis. We don't have enough soldiers. That is why if you look at the strategy in Borno State, it is very clear. Protect a few population centers and the access and exits to them. We don't have enough assets to hold territory. So if Borno is bogging us down and Niger State bogs us down, we will not be able to do any other thing. You then ask yourself the question, why would we be in a situation where to win elections in Nigeria, you deploy soldiers and police and helicopters? Or, okay, let me rephrase. To get yourself announced as the winner in elections in Nigeria, you deploy soldiers and police and Air Force. But to fight Boko Haram and address mass atrocities, what do? You invite us to prayers. We have a crisis of governance and a crisis of misplaced priorities. May the souls of the departed recorded in this report continue to remind us of that. Thank you.
Thereafter, the convener, Bring Back Our Guest, Aisha Yusuf, stresses that ensuring adequate security should be the priority of the government, hence calling on the government to step up their responsibilities to making lives valuable through providing security for all.
What is the value of our lives? 3,188 people were said to have been killed last year. And what did you do? At least, and that is at least. The numbers could be way, way more than that. The question is, what did we do? Did we go away feeling that we survived? Are we happy? We entered 2020 feeling that we are amongst those who survived. What about the people that have been killed? Do we think about them? At the time we heard of their death, what did we do? Did we just say, thank God we are not the ones that were killed, or we meant something to us? For everybody that is killed, something in us is also killed. For one person that is killed, all of us are killed in one way or the other. If we are not thinking of ourselves, what are we thinking of our children? What society are they growing up in where they know that the lives of a fellow citizen means nothing? When our children know that if anything happens to them, that the country will move away and nothing will be done. 3,188 people at least, and yet we go on with our business as if nothing is happening in our country. And even when a day is set aside for us to mourn those who have died, we don't bother. I always like to remind us, wherever I have the opportunity, that yesterday's victims were once survivors. Today's victims were yesterday's survivors. And tomorrow's victims would be today's survivors. Who are today's survivors? You and I are today's survivors. You and I are sitting down here today and feeling that we cannot be the victim. That was the same way those who died felt. And I want to also remind us that those who have been killed will not be killed again. Those who have been killed would not be killed again. The next to be killed are those of us that are alive. You and I are the next target. And I tell you right now, as we sit right now, let's ask ourselves, is there anything being done for us not to be victims? Why are we okay with the situation that we have? Why are we okay with those who have been mandated to protect the lives and properties of our citizens are not doing that? And we're sitting down and we're okay with it. Those who have died will never be able to make demands. And when these people who are killing come to kill us, they do not care whether you're silent or you're vocal. They do not care whether you defend government or you're a critic of the government. They do not care whether you're rich or you're poor. They do not care whether you're uniformed or you're a civilian. They do not care whether you're male or you're female, or a child or an adult. They do not care whether you live in the city or you live in the village. All they know is that they want to take a life, and they take that life cheaply. We must ensure that we make our lives expensive. Let them, when they come to take us, let them know that there's a nation behind us, that we go after them. And I tell you, right now, we do not have that. 1 out of 6 of our security, of the deaths are security agents. Do you know what that means? Have we even ever mourned them? Have we called out their names? How do their families feel that their loved ones that they sent out to protect the nation, that gave their lives for this nation, nothing was done about it? How do the rest that are there right now feel when they know that if anything happens to them, the same way it happened to their colleagues, that nothing will be done? We all are part of this, and we all must make a difference. We all must say enough is enough. We all must say our lives are important. I know it's good to fast and pray. I know it's good to go to our churches and our mosques. It's not enough. For like a little girl of 5 years said, bullets, prayers don't stop bullets. And the selfish thing is that we feel we have survived because we pray. We like to say it is not our portion. We like to say God forbid. And I always remind everybody that the last victim equally said God forbid. The last victim said it wasn't their portion. But when the bullet came, it met them. And one thing you should always ask yourself, we have this false sense of security, is that, is anyone doing anything to protect you? Or is it that they have not just come to your doorstep? And that should scare every one of us. And that should make us, on a serious note, demand that our government, whose primary responsibility is the protection of lives and properties, indeed begin to protect lives and properties. And in governance, there are two sides, the demand and supply side. Those we elected will supply, and we that elected them must demand. And if we do not demand, they will give us what comes first, which is bad governance. Because by doing absolutely nothing, you can give that bad governance. So today, as we look at this report, let's personalize it. Let's be selfish about it. Let's say to ourselves, I don't want to be a victim in a country where I will not be recognized. Let's think about our children. Because even inside our houses, we are not safe. They come into the houses. They were done with the villages. We did nothing. They went to the poor, we did nothing. They've come to the cities, we are still doing nothing. They're going after the rich, we are still silent. If we don't stop now, when are we going to talk?
They opined that only killings that were verified by 2 or more sources were included in the report, as figures provided represent the least possible numbers of casualties. Hence, there is every tendency that the actual casualty figures are likely to be much higher. I'm Vincent Okushi, reporting for Quality Television.
Audio Jungle.